Hey guys, welcome back to Dream Phonograph, our quiet corner for sleepy history wanderings. Tonight we drift behind cloister walls where frost glimmers on the stone and the bells keep time for slow hearts. If these soft journeys help you unwind, please subscribe, like, and let the next bell find you with notifications on. I recorded this one with a pace meant to match the rhythm of breathing, the same steady calm that monks carried through the long winter. Tell us your city and the time on your clock in the comments so we can imagine your glow across the map. Settle into your bed, pull the blanket a little closer. Loosen your shoulders, unclench your jaw, and let each exhale fall like a snowflake melting into stillness. If you like gentle rituals, dim the lights, or light a small candle, the kind that flickers but doesn't hurry. Let the hum of the room quiet down, and breathe with me as we walk into the slow warmth of winter cloisters, where bread rises patiently, ink dries in thought, and every bell is an invitation to rest. Are you settled? Blanket just right. Good. Let's wander very slowly, and only a little, into a place where the morning arrives in a small sound. A bell, not an urgent bell, taps the air above a square of grass silvered with frost, and the sound goes up to the sky and then comes down like a soft ribbon. You stand under your hood in the cloister walk, breath a pale cloud, fingers tucked into sleeves, waiting for the note to fade and the next to follow. Stone keeps a cool memory, and the flagstones beneath your soles remember last night's cold without complaint. By the way, the bell is measured, not too much, not too little, keeping time even when sunlight is unsure. The winter schedule stretches the vigil readings and shifts the hours so that you do not have to hurry the dark. You cross from shadow into the kale factory's dim warmth, and the difference is like dipping your hands into a bowl where steam has been resting. Right, it smells faintly of wool and smoke and the memory of yesterday's coals. Someone coughs softly, someone turns a page, and the dry whisper of parchment sounds like a small broom on clean stone. Winter foods live quietly around you, even when you cannot see them. In the bakehouse, a leaven sleeps and wakes in its own slow rhythm. In the cellar, barrels hold their cool breath. In the fish pond, the surface wears a thin glass that cracks with a shy sound. Come to think of it, this is how you survive the long winter. You keep close company with time, with broth that never boils too hard, with bread that waits until the bell says yes. You linger a moment in the cloister where a narrow strip of sun has found the stone and made a very small summer. By the way, if you stand in it and turn your wrists, the light does a quiet mending to the ache that cold leaves behind. The garden beds rest without complaint, the labels wait, the paths pretend to be rivers made of frost. A brother passes with a basket that smells faintly of onions, and the smell follows him like a soft ribbon into the passage. Right, your stomach notices without making a scene. All it wants from the morning is certainty, which comes in bowls and bells. In the passage, the walls hold their own weather, dry, dusty, the kind of air that has read many pages and approved each one. By the way, your steps remember where they were going before you do, and it is comfortable to be led by the body like that. Against the cloister wall, a shelf holds yesterday's candles with wicks trimmed and ready for second duty. You take one as if taking a breath and feel the weight say almost nothing, as if light weighed less than it looked. The Garth's well wears a thin scarf of steam where sun thinks about visiting the bucket rope. By the way, ropes and mornings are similar, both are better for being handled slowly. You pause at the refectory door long enough to smell bread reheated and a faint sweetness that might be dried fruit or only a memory pretending to be. Right, you decide it does not matter which. Breakfast is a soft thing. A wooden bowl of pottage, oats or barley or a little maslin flour sits under your hands like a tame animal, breathing steam. By the way, small beer is more polite than water in this season, not for its boldness, but for its courtesy to the stomach and the cold. You tear a heel of yesterday's loaf, and the crust crackles like distant frost. At the pantry hatch there is the smell of linen and grain and a touch of beeswax from clean wiped shelves. Right, you tap the crumb with a finger, not to judge, only to feel the day's first texture. Someone murmurs a psalm line that mentions light. You answer with the next half line without meaning to, and the words fit the steam rising from your bowl. On the way back along the cloister, your breath and the breath of the garth trees agree to keep the same slow pace. A thin rind of ice along the rill snaps like spun sugar under a careful boot, and the sun thinks about being brave enough to show itself on stone. By the way, none of this asks anything of you except to notice it. Later, in the kitchen, a pan meets a little fat and makes a sound like a polite hello. You slice a turnip thin as paper and let it lie down to learn the warmth. It becomes sweet in a way that feels like a memory of late summer. Right, you sprinkle a pinch of salt, and it agrees to stay. At the long table, someone mends a strap with waxed thread that carries the faint hive scent of bees. Bees do their steady work while you sleep, and even now their summer patience hides in candles and the shine of thread. You check the pantry corner where apples rest in straw. A few have kept well, their skins matte and calm. You turn one gently so it will not learn a flat side, and the straw makes a quiet sea sound. Right, you think of a tart that will lift the day by a small degree, no more than a candle lifts a room. Before noon, the calefactory offers its slow breath again. Hands warmed, you page through a familiar chapter and notice how the letters look like fine threads pulled across a frame. Steady, sufficient, not seeking applause. This is what winter asks, to be sufficient and steady, to turn hunger into a rhythm and light into a companion. The calefactory is a room that forgives numb fingers. You drift in, you find a bench. You let the heat seep like a small kindness through wool and skin. The fire does not roar. It murmurs, as if not to startle the pages that lean open on a low desk. Clothing in winter is a simple architecture. Tunic, cowl, sometimes an extra hood, sometimes mitts of rough wool with the ends free for turning pages. By the way, allowance is made for climate, a rare softness in a rule of steady lines. Garments suit place and season. You feel permitted to be warm. There is a rhythm to thawing, fingers first, then wrists, then the breath widens, and the eyes stop watering from the draft. Right, you hold your hands out, turn them, and watch pink return like morning to a quiet shoreline. Someone mentions the grain tally in a voice no louder than the fire, and you think of sacks asleep in the loft, and of cats who keep a patient watch, and of the way a loaf cracks when it cools, making a sound like a shy bird. Winter is careful, and you are careful with it. You close the book, and the page keeps a little warmth, as if it were grateful to your palms. Another bench hosts a quiet industry. A cow learns a new hem, the needle traveling like a small, certain pilgrim through wool. By the way, you moisten the thread with a breath, so it will behave, and in that tiny fog, your own breath comes back kinder. From a hook, a kettle keeps a reserved simmer, nothing that would trouble a leaf-warming water for hands that have been to the wood store. Right, you pour it over your fingers as if the day were teaching you gentleness for the second time. Across the room, sandals remember roads. A leather thong accepts a new knot. A sole gains a stitch that promises one more month of kindness to feet. By the way, wax rubbed along the thread makes it shine like a thought that has finally decided what it means. Two brothers exchange few words about salt and barley. The conversation is mostly small nods and glances toward the door where baskets come and go. Right, work, like warmth, spreads better than it gathers. You feel yourself added to it without being asked. You lay your hands on the bench one more time before rising, as if to thank the wood for holding you up. By the way, there is a talent to leaving warmth in the room rather than taking it with you. It is done by stepping away slowly. A shelf by the small window keeps cups turned mouth down like resting bells. You choose one with a tiny chip that harms nothing, and you like it more for the honesty. By the way, a chip on a cup is like a winter cloud. It mentions weather without spoiling the day. Someone brings a little board with a heel of cheese and 2 dried figs for a brother who is reading. You set them down without speaking, and he nods as if you had recited a psalm. Right, you tuck the board away when it is empty, and it becomes part of the room again, as calm as a shut book. Before you go, you hold your hands above the brazier, palms open to whatever can be learned from heat. There is always something. By the way, you think of the garden under its frost and feel persuaded that roots are practicing warmth in their own low language. At the threshold, you adjust your cowl so it lies without argument on your neck. Right, a habit that fits is another kind of fire. On a low stool, a brother darns a mitten with a bone needle and a loop of grey yarn, pulling the thread with the same patience used for reading. Ash is coaxed from last night's embers with a poker, and the glow underneath is like a buried smile. You hold your hands to it for a moment, then draw them back, learning again the small skill of not being greedy with heat. A shelf keeps a few dried apples in a net. You count them without meaning to, imagining the sound they will make when sliced into a pot, a bright little tapping that feels like a promise. Right, the brazier breathes, the window shows a quiet square of grey, and time feels fed. Someone brings a jug of small beer and sets it by the wall where it will not grow sulky with cold. Its cap of foam is like a tiny cowl. The jug is a traveller too, from brewhouse to pantry to table, always arriving exactly where warmth expects it. In the corner, a basket keeps onions and a few heads of garlic asleep. You brush a skin and it lifts like a quiet moth. Right, you imagine the way they will meet a pan and become the beginning of supper, not loudly, only faithfully. At the basin, your fingers learn warm water the way reeds learn wind, by bending a little and remembering to spring back. By the way, a drop on the floor is not a mistake. It is a visiting lake that will go home on its own. You pull your sleeves down and notice the mild animal sweetness of wool that has done its job. Right, cloth is a companion in winter. It says nothing and keeps its promises. When you stand to leave, your knees have learned the bench, and your shoulders the habit of the cowl, and the air on your face is the friendly sort that teaches cheeks to be comfortable. If you forget a line you were reading, it will wait without impatience. The bakehouse is a mild star in the winter map. You can feel it from the yard, a soft pulse of heat through the doorway. Flour dust floats in peaceful weather inside, and the air tastes faintly sweet like the promise of a crust. You lift the peel and feel its smooth wood, worn by years of sliding loaves into the quiet red. The leaven has been fed and rests like a living thought in the big bowl, breathing through the cloth. By the way, the cellarer's keys ring softly when he brings the measure. Flour from the chest, salt from the crocks, and water that has taken the night's cool into itself. You work the dough and it presses back gently, patient as a monk at prayer. Cats step between sacks, tails raised, doing serious work without making a fuss. Right, you scratch one lightly, and flour prints bloom on black fur, and then you brush it off as if dust were a blessing to be shared. Loaves go in, time shortens and lengthens with the scent, and when a crust splits, it sighs. You fold dough for tomorrow's leaven and set a little aside in a cloth, the old trick of keeping a memory to teach the next day to rise. By the way, rye and wheat meet here as equals maslin so that strength and tenderness travel together in each slice. You dust a board, you mark a cross, you nod to no one in particular. In the corner, a crock of sour pickles thinks quietly, roots softened with salt and a memory of summer dill. Right, you do not eat them yet, you only note their patience, and how winter foods keep each other company in their jars and barrels like neighbors who know not to knock too hard. The oven learns a second load, and you feel how heat moves differently now, gentler, more conversational. The peel's handle carries old warmth in its grain, passed from hand to hand over years, like a story that never quite finishes. You sweep the hearth with a damp broom so the dust will choose to behave, and the scent that rises is part water, part flour, part day. Right, a cat takes up a new post and pretends this was the plan. When the bell speaks for the meal, you slice a test loaf and listen. The crumb sighs agreeably, and the crust offers the smallest resistance, as if collaborating. A loaf set aside for a neighbor in need already sits wrapped, tagged with a string and a simple mark. And when the last boards cool, you lay cloths like clouds and let the room become quiet again, warmer than before and smelling of good decisions. Right, flour on your sleeve looks like a map of small countries. You do not wash it away yet. Some of today's bread will go to the almonry, sliced with a steady hand and wrapped in a cloth still warm. The rest will sit in orderly rows, cooling on boards, a pale fog hovering like a low cloud. The meal bell later will be merry but not loud. A loaf set down before you feels heavier than it weighs, carrying winter's thrift and summer's sun together. By the way, a counted share already belongs to the porter's bench, so when steam meets the gatehouse air later, it is the same loaf you shape now, simply finishing its journey. A pan near the mouth of the oven keeps a simple pudding bread softened with milk and a whisper of honey so that nothing tired is wasted. It is the sort of kindness that returns as strength. Right, you nudge a coal with the iron and listen to the small language that embers speak when they approve. Someone laughs very softly at a private joke with the dough, and it feels right for bread to be in on something human. By the way, you mark the last batch with a pattern only you will notice later. It is not necessary, but it pleases the hands that made it. You draw the peel and hold a loaf to your ear, hearing the tiny song of crust that cools and contracts. Right, even bread enjoys a last word. Near the door a sieve leans flour still in its lace. You tap it once, and a white snow remembers to fall. By the way, snow in a room is a kind of blessing if it is flour. You hang the peel on its nail, and the wood looks relieved to be a line instead of a lever. Right, tools enjoy their nouns when a day of verbs is done. A jar of poppy seeds waits like a tiny star field. You roll a warm crust across its mouth, and a few constellations decide to travel with you. By the way, stars on bread feel like luck that you can eat. A cloth covers the leftover loaves as if tucking in children. You smooth it once, and it learns to be still. By the way, stillness is a flavor too. You lift the kneading trough and wipe beneath it where flour collects like polite snowdrifts. The wood, grateful, shows its grain as if smiling. Right, rooms brighten by inches, not bursts. An ash pail takes the day's accounting without complaint. You bank the coals with a soft tongue of iron and they agree to rest. By the way, resting heat is another way of saying patience. Before you close the door, you set a bowl of cool water where steam can learn to be quiet by degrees. Right, tomorrow's dough will appreciate such small rehearsals. You stack cooling racks so air can make a gentle crossing between loaves, and the crusts answer with a faint, contented ticking. By the way, a rack is only a bridge for warmth learning to leave. You step outside, and the bakehouse door settles behind you with a sigh that sounds like flour deciding to rest. Right, the courtyard receives you with a quiet that belongs to good work finished. Keys speak in winter. Their small ring is a kind of map, cellar, buttery, granary store. You walk with the cellarer, who counts with his eyes as much as his fingers, and the steps down change the air from outside cold to inside cool, which is a different creature. Casks sleep like round animals, bellies full of ale and small beer, and their wooden hoops make circles of patience. By the way, a chalk note on a stave is a winter story in a single line. This many measures left, this many days until brewing. The salted fish keeps its quiet country in layered barrels. You lift a lid and smell the sea's memory in a careful thread. Measures matter. A ladle drawn level, a scoop flattened with the edge of a hand, a tally on the wall beam done with the blunt end of a knife. Right, a little extra is left for the infirmary kitchen because cold asks for kindness in bowls. Cheeses rest on wooden slats like pale moons, turned with steady hands so their rinds teach them patience and balance. By the way, the spicery is a very small shelf here. Pepper a luxury, mustard seed more common, vinegar a friendly workhorse, and each thing has its place because finding it quickly is a kindness to winter. A little vinegar wakes a pot, a little honey soothes a throat, none of it is loud. Sacks of peas and beans lean patiently in the cool, the winter friends that keep their shape in a pot and give it body. By the way, you rub a split pea between thumb and finger. It is a tiny moon, pale and certain, and later it will be a soft planet in a bowl. In the brewhouse corner, a shallow tub keeps balm like a quiet cloud at the top of yesterday's ale. It is a living thing that asks to be fed, and shared bread likes to borrow it, and so does the next brew. Right, a cooper checks a hoop and listens to wood speak in small creaks, and a drop along a seam is attended with calm cloth and patient pressure. A shallow tray of sprouted barley nods near the warmest corner, a rehearsal for brewing when the weather remembers how to be generous. Kilns dry green malt with a patience that makes a person hum without knowing it, and the sweet grain smell is the sort of comfort you carry home in your sleeves. You tap a cask with a soft mallet and listen, not for drama, only for that hollow solid note that says I am content. The spile comes out, and a gentle breath answers, and you taste with a clean reed small beer that minds its manners and keeps winter from being unfriendly. Salted herrings soak in a wooden tub, their stiffness letting go into something more forgiving. The tub water will feed the garden edge. Nothing here is lost if it knows how to travel. You lift one and lay it flat with a kindness you would want for yourself on a tired day. There is always linen, strips to bind stoppers, cloths to catch a drip, bags to keep a measure honest. A square of old sheet becomes noble again when it pleases the cellar to be clean. On a peg by the steps hangs the cellarer's apron, stiff with good work and salt. You touch the hem and it leaves the cleanest dust on your finger, like a badge for having visited provisions. You breathe and let the cool settle in your chest, not cold, just the kind of air that thinks before it moves. Somewhere above, footfalls pass like soft drums. You climb back up into day and blink. The keys ring once more and sound for a moment like a small bell that only you can hear. At the top step, you pause and feel the shift from cool to cold, as if the air were handing you back your breath. By the way, thresholds are polite like that. You make a square of notes in your head: salt, barley, a thought about moving the cheese board closer to the door and put it down gently so it will wait. Right, lists kept kindly tend to keep you kindly. On the strap, your shoulder carries the idea of onions, and you let the idea ride a little longer than needed. By the way, carrying and thinking are often the same motion here. You make a note with chalk on the stairwell stone where figures like to stand. 2 jars moved, 1 cask content, salt to be remembered kindly. By the way, numbers behave better when they have a cool wall to lean on. At the doorway, you shift your shoulder to help the basket find a comfortable path, and the onions inside agree not to bruise each other. Right, this is logistics at winter speed. You step through the buttery to look at the floor's clean hush. A few stray grains gather in the corner, and you sweep them into a small, satisfied line. By the way, a clean corner is like a friendly nod from a room. You lift one sack just enough to let air change its mind beneath it. The cloth sighs and settles and will keep better for the trouble. Right, care in winter is often measured in inches and pauses. On a peg, the tally cord keeps little knots for vinegar and for oil. You touch each and think about moving a jar upstairs so the kitchen won't have to fetch in the cold. By the way, errands shared between rooms keep the whole house warm. You lift the lamp and it approves the tidy racks with a soft gold blink. In the infirmary kitchen, steam is a language that says stay. You stand near the hearth and watch the broth roll in a slow, round breath, never hurrying, always arriving. The cook murmurs to the pot as if speaking to a skittish animal, and the pot settles. Herbs hang from beams, sage gone pale and fuzzy at the edges, thyme that still remembers the hillside, a little fennel seed in a pouch that rattles like distant beads. By the way, some say warming foods spelt certain roots, and a little wine in broth comfort the chill of winter. It sits kindly with the spoon. You chop onions with a slow hand, and the knife clicks in a steady rhythm that is almost a prayer. Right, the smell is sharp then sweet, and when it meets the broth it goes soft at once, like a stubborn thought that suddenly agrees. The bowl warms your palms. A brother with a cough thanks you in a voice like paper, and you nod, and there is nothing to fix, only to cradle. Outside, a pale light sits on the cloister grass. Inside, the spoon marks quiet circles that do not need to end. For those who are unwell, the kitchen keeps a different shelf. A small measure of eggs, a little soft cheese, a spoon of honey in warm water, and sometimes a sip of spiced wine that remembers summer. By the way, leeks do very good work in winter. They arrive green even on grey days and make friends with barley and a thumb of fennel. You set out sops bread softened in broth so that teeth and throat may rest. Right, the wooden bowls come back warm from the hands that held them, as if each one had learned to be a small hearth. Later, herbs return to their hooks, and the fire goes to embers with the courtesy of a guest who never overstays. You cover the pot so it can continue its quiet thinking, and the room smells like thyme and good patience. A mortar learns the soft weight of coriander and a kindness of anise. You bruise them not for force but for fragrance. The sound is a slow clock that makes no demands. Bed curtains take their turn by the brazier and remember how to be dry. You shake them once, and the dust agrees to leave politely, and the fabric holds a faint sun of its own. A warming stone is wrapped and carried like a cat that does not mind being useful. On a small shelf, syrups wait. Rose for a throat, honey and vinegar for a stubborn cough, a little mint because it persuades the stomach to be friendly. Labels are a neat habit here. Even in winter, memory likes to be helped. You turn to the grain jars and lift the lid on barley. It smells like good news with no exclamation mark. A handful rattles into the pot and becomes patient while you fetch the leeks. When someone sleeps, you set the spoon so it will be found without searching, and you lay a folded cloth where a forehead might want it later. The room keeps quiet for them, as rooms do when they have learned affection. The embers will hold until the next breath is needed. You bank them like coins for morning. You rinse a mortar with warm water and let the scent of coriander tell the bowl a small secret it can keep. By the way, bowls that have heard secrets seem to pour more gently. Shelves accept clean cloths folded to the same width as a handspan. This is not a rule so much as a kindness to eyes that will be tired later. Right, you smooth one fold twice because the second smoothing is never wasted. A patient wakes to ask if night has turned. You answer softly that it is in the middle of turning, which is what night likes to do in winter. You add a spoon of broth to a cup and watch steam consider the ceiling. At the end of the passage, a shutter taps and you close it with 2 fingers and a wordless apology to the air. By the way, the hinge remembers gratitude much longer than the shutter remembers the draft. You set 3 cups upside down in a row, a tiny procession waiting for a start time that will arrive when it is ready. Right, schedules in this room listen to bodies as much as bells. You fold 2 cloths smaller and tuck them where a sleepy hand will reach without thinking. By the way, thoughtfulness is a shelf that never runs out of space. You rest a palm on the cool stone of the sill, and it answers with the day's memory of sun. Right, even stone keeps accounts, and always in your favor when you move slowly. A small ledger notes nothing dramatic. 2 bowls at terce, 1 at sext, a sop at none, and the act of writing is itself a comfort, as if the pot is agreeing with the page. By the way, dates in winter move like soft beads on a string. You count by meals rather than numbers. You crush a bay leaf between finger and thumb and wake a memory of a hillside you cannot name. Right, you let it go into the pot and think how a leaf can be both itself and a place. At dusk, you rinse the ladle and set it across the rim so that even in the dark the hand will find the handle without hunting. The coals lower their breathing. You close the door softly with the same care you use for a sleeping child. The path to the fish pond crunches underfoot. Frost writes small poems on the sedge. You test the thin ice with a reed, and it answers with a star of cracks, delicate and decisive. The water beneath is very calm, as if listening. Sluices mutter where the rill enters, and you check the boards with a mittened hand, feeling for the kind of damp that means everything is flowing as it should. By the way, managed water ponds, rills, mills, lets winter carry its own provisions across the land like a quiet caravan. A basket waits for a Friday, and you think of fleshless meals that do not feel like less. Bread, fish, greens from the warm nook against the south wall, ale that minds its manners. Right, a heron lifts from the far bank and creases the air without noise, as if not to wake the day. Net mending is winter talk with the hands. You sit on a low stool and pass twine through a wooden gauge, knot after knot that hums the same tune as the water. By the way, carp and tench doze in the deeper water. They ask little, only that the sluice give them breath, and that ice not grow thick where the rill enters. You lift a board and let a trickle quicken, watching for the small swirl that means the under ice is refreshed. Right, a pole breaks a thin skin of ice along the edge, not with anger but with housekeeping, and the sound is like a soft plate set on a wooden table. You watch bubbles trail from under a board and count them 1, 2, 3 like a child learning to trust numbers. The heron leaves a hieroglyph in the mud that says only, "I was here," which is all that needs saying. A small basket keeps stale bread for pond-edge crumbs, not as feed in earnest, but as a ceremony of noticing. Fish acknowledge in a slow, dignified congregation. You smile and put the basket back because ceremony is enough. A second sluice carries a thinner voice. You lift its gate just enough that ice will think twice before trying to settle there. By the way, the handle is smooth from winters you do not remember, but that your hands somehow know. On a stone by the bank, a basket waits for mending, and you thread a new willow rib through the old lattice, hearing a faint creak that sounds like agreement. Right, you imagine it later, by the kitchen hearth with onions in it, doing the humble work of holding things together. You kneel and touch the water. It is colder than a thought and cleaner than a word. By the way, the touch travels up your arm and somehow warms your chest. A brother comes with a pole and tests the farther edge. He nods without speaking, and you answer by stepping aside, the conversation complete. Right, 2 geese mutter in the meadow beyond, as if practicing spring when no one is listening. Near the sluice, a willow whip promises future baskets. You test its bend and imagine the handle warmed by kitchen steam. Winter makes these gentle plans possible. Busier seasons forget to draw such small maps. On the way home, you pass the smokehouse where a ribbon of scent escapes nothing grand, only wood remembering fish. Right, Friday will be content. You rub your hands together, and they rasp like paper. Back at the gate, you stamp the cold from your boots, and the sound echoes the bell in a friendly way, 2 small notes that happen to meet. Inside, you set the net to dry in a high loop where shadows will not sulk, and you tip the basket so air can memorize its weave. By the way, airing tools is how winter says thank you. On the path back, you stop once more at the sluice and listen for the neat, obedient song of water working. By the way, a working song does not need words. You tighten one cord on the net and smile at how quickly a knot learns its manners when praised. Right, tools like to be told when they are doing well. You hang the net on its winter hook so the loops will remember their shape. A little twist in each mesh keeps tomorrow from tangling. By the way, a spare float goes into the basket like a calm thought saved for later. You chalk a small fish on a slate by the door to remind the kitchen of Friday. Not that anyone would forget, but reminders are a kind of kindness to busy hands. Right, the almonry has a share marked too, because hospitality borrows from every room without emptying any. In the tool alcove, you set the ice broom bristles upward to dry, and slide the pole where it cannot fall on sleepy toes. By the way, safety in winter is mostly the art of putting things where they would like to be anyway. You check the weir pin and feel the honest bite of oak against the palm. A spare wedge sits in its little niche, waiting for a day when waiting will be enough work. Right, you tell the water you will be back at none to listen again. Back by the gate, you set your damp mittens where the hearth's memory will find them, and you write one small note for the cook, pond clear, net mended. By the way, writing to a friend who shares your day is another way of warming hands. Before you go, you look once more at the thin skin reforming along the edge and feel a quiet satisfaction that is not pride, only partnership. Right, fish and people, water and wood, each keeping the other's winter promises. Light is a modest guest in winter. You place the page near the window where the sky keeps its pale promise, and the ink dries in a slow, thoughtful way. The nib scratches, a small cricket that remembers to be quiet. Beeswax belongs to the choir and the altar, a brighter flame that stands up straighter. Tallow and rushlights do the humble work of halls and steps and hands. By the way, Candlemas blesses the year's light in a small procession, candles gathered like tame stars in human hands. You trace a capital with a brown wash and a little red, and think of the slow patience of the hive in summer that becomes this defense against darkness in winter. Right, your breath fogs the glass for a moment, and you make a small circle with your sleeve, and the world returns. The line you copy speaks of mercy, and your hand moves more kindly, as if the word could travel through the wrist into the ink. The bell will come, and you will close the book, and the page will keep the gentle shine of work well done. A quill needs small courtesies. You pare the nib with a penknife, thin as a breath, and the feather smells faintly of rain. By the way, a cup of sand waits to kiss the wet ink, so the letters will not wander. Lines are pricked and ruled so your words keep a path. The awl makes a dot as quiet as snow. Ink sits in a horn like a pocket of night oak galls, a little iron, a little gum, winter patience turned into script. Right, a mistake is not a storm. A knife lifts the thinnest skin of ink, and the page forgives. Windows in winter hold their own economy. Where glass is thin, oiled parchment lends a steady milk light, and the page looks pleased with it. You shift your stool to follow the pale square across the desk, the way a cat follows a sun patch. Even the candles have a ledger, beeswax saved for feast and choir, tallow for the walks and the workrooms, rushlights for steps and corners. By the way, a wick trimmed kindly will not smoke. You carry the snips like a secret and do your rounds, and when the bell calls you let the page rest. It will greet you later without complaint. Rubrics enjoy their small red certainty. You touch the point of the brush to the margin, and the letter rises like a polite guest who knows where to sit. By the way, the shell that holds your color still remembers the sea if you listen with your thumb. Pumice gives the page a last quiet snow before writing. You pass the stone in a circle, and the circle learns to be invisible. Right, a crumb brush takes away what is no longer needed, approving the surface with its light steps. A tin of sand sits open and sparkling like a patient constellation. You tip a pinch where a line seems eager to travel, and the sand shows it how to be still. When you set the quill aside, you store its thought under a strip of wool so it will not dry too quickly. By the way, pens appreciate being put to bed. You tie up the day's quires with a soft cord that has learned not to bite the spine. Right, you label the bundle with a pencil mark that means everything to you and nothing to a thief. Quires gather like well-behaved birds, 4 leaves, then 4, until a gathering knows itself as a future book. You pat the stack the way one reassures a loaf rising near the stove. Gently, with confidence it will become. A bone folder smooths a crease the way a hand smooths a pillow for sleep. Scraping parchment is a winter task that respects light. You hold the skin in a frame and draw the knife with a snow's patience. The curl is fine as breath, and the sound is like distant paper. Right, you stop when the surface begins to feel like a dry tongue ready to learn ink. Binding thread waxed with a thumb remembers to behave. You pierce with an awl, and the holes are so modest that they would blush if they could. A title will come later, or never, and that is fine. Usefulness is its own name. At day's end, you cap the horn, bank the lamp, and set the quill to rest in a cup where it will not dream of rolling away. The room keeps a faint perfume of gum and gall and tallow that everyone agrees not to mention. Right, you leave, and the page looks pleased to be alone with what it knows. On your way out, you pinch a wick to silence, and it accepts your fingers' counsel without smoke. By the way, quiet endings are a craft too. You settle the brush and penknife in their drawer so they will not chatter to each other at night. Right, silence is a workshop tool as real as any mallet. You set the choir bundle under a smooth stone so the night will remember where to find it without searching. By the way, patience stored this way does not go stale. A breath on the glass leaves a small perfect circle you wipe away with your sleeve, and the world returns with gratitude. Right, this is the last task of light for now. You set a little square of wool over the inkhorn so the night will not drink it, and you tilt the sand tin closed with a soft click that sounds like a nod. By the way, the room seems to grow calmer when each thing finds its small bed. Winter is a workshop season. In a room that smells of flax and old timber, ropes are turned, tools are set right, a cartwheel learns to be true again. You lift a mallet. It is a friendly weight. Fibers twist under your fingers, a slow river of threads becoming something that will hold and give at once. By the way, repairs have a social life. A plane's curl falls, someone chuckles at a memory, and a hinge accepts a pin with a mute, content sigh. You pause now and then at the door to breathe the clear air and count the small chimneys, each a quiet punctuation mark on the sky. Right, the hands warm and cool by turns, and that alternation feels like a kind of prayer too, a keeping of time without words. Knots have their own inventory, a loop to hold, a bend to join, a hitch to trust for a moment then let go. You test them with a quiet tug and hang the coil where the next pair of hands can find it without looking. The tool chest is a calm alphabet. Adze, awl, bit, chisel, draw knife, each in its slot so fingers find them even on a dim afternoon. By the way, order is a kind of warmth. It saves the small heat of searching. You measure a bench and shave a sliver from one leg until it confesses it was longer than its friends. Right, the wobble gives up, and the bench sits like a good thought. For the kitchen, a new trivet learns to stand steady over embers, 3 feet agreeing to be patient with pots. You turn the iron with a rag and it blushes, and the smell is like rain on stone. Waxed thread behaves for a torn satchel. A strap accepts a new buckle without complaint. By the way, mending is a vote for tomorrow. It says I will be useful again. Somewhere a rope thumps softly against a post, and you think about how ropes and rules are related. Both restrain, both support, both can be kind when properly tended. You coil the finished length on a peg like a sleeping snake, and it looks satisfied. You oil a hinge until it forgets its complaint and joins the door's idea of quiet. By the way, a single drop, if thoughtful, is as eloquent as a sermon. The ladder earns 2 new rungs and you test them with a knee, pleased when the wood answers with a modest yes. Right, you chalk the side with a small mark so the next climber will find the step without hunting. On the window ledge, a coil of flax waits its turn. You pull a few fibers and watch them agree to become one line where there were many. By the way, hands are happiest when they are making agreements. You stack finished coils like quiet serpents and write a little note of their lengths on the wall, a shy boast for future hands. Right, the chalk speaks softly but remembers exactly. A shallow box collects nails that have decided to straighten again. You thank them with a tap and put them in the row with the others who learned patience. Right, iron responds to consideration almost as well as wood does. Somewhere a rope thumps softly against a post, and you think about how ropes and rules are related. Both restrain, both support, both can be kind when properly tended. You coil the finished length on a peg like a sleeping snake, and it looks satisfied. Hemp whispers when you twist it. You tease fibers from a hank and lay them along your thigh, palm, and knee, giving the rhythm, and the strands agree to become a line that will not argue with a load. By the way, a little water on the palm tames the flyaways. It is like smoothing a child's hair. A whetstone drinks, a blade answers. You draw iron along grit, slow ovals, the sound closer to rain than to work. Leather gets a new patch where a strap admitted it was tired, and the stitch lies down neatly as if it had always been there. On the small loom, a shuttle learns a measured patience, passing through winter linen with a sound like a sparrow's wing. Right, you warm the shuttle in your sleeve before the first pass. It is one of those kindnesses you do because someone once did it for you. Knots have their own inventory. A loop to hold, a bend to join, a hitch to trust for a moment then let go. You test them with a quiet tug and hang the coil where the next pair of hands can find it without looking. You hang the mallet where its own shadow will find it in the morning, and you turn the stool so it will not surprise a sleepy knee. By the way, arranging tomorrow is the kindest part of finishing today. On the sill you leave a coil with its tail tucked, lesson learned, lesson kept. Right, order is a lullaby in this room. You touch each peg in turn the way one might count a rosary mallet, adze, plain, saw, and the board receives them like familiar notes returning to their places in a song. By the way, a tool that sleeps where it wakes makes kinder mornings. You loop 3 coils by size so the next hand won't have to guess. Hemp, then flax, then a stubborn piece that likes to remember knots. Right, a chalk mark on the bench says what was finished and what only started thinking about being finished. Shavings go to a basket for the kitchen fire. They will teach a flame to speak politely before the logs take over. By the way, the smallest scraps often make the best introductions. You test the window latch and leave it on the friendly side of tight. Winter prefers no surprises. Right, a slip of leather under a wobbling stool leg turns a complaint into cooperation. Last, you hang the lamp so the wick can breathe and not sulk, and you set the striker where a sleepy hand tomorrow will find it without looking. By the way, good work is mostly arranging for ease. At the gatehouse, the porter's bench sits in a square of light that moves during the day as slowly as a snail. You bring a basket of bread whose warmth passes through the cloth in a polite way, not insisting, just offering. Travelers arrive in 1s and 2s, their breath white, their words few. By the way, alms are a winter habit as much as a rule bread, a ladle of broth, sometimes a few splinters of dry wood wrapped in twine. The ladle taps the rim, and the steam rises like a small prayer that does not need to be heard to be answered. You listen to quiet stories that do not ask to be told. A road that was longer than expected, a shoe that gave way, a daughter who will be glad of this loaf. Right, you do not press, the steam does the talking. You add a pinch of barley to the pot, and it turns the broth from thin to kind. By the way, the porter's ledger has a space for numbers, and a bigger space for small notes. Old cloak mended, shoe stitched, token for the mill road, not because anyone will ask, but because winter likes to remember where it has been generous. Sometimes a traveler leaves a story instead of a thanks. A hill with a view of 3 counties, a bridge that sings in wind, the taste of apples kept in a neighbor's loft. Right, you keep those in the same place as you keep spare twine and a half candle, close by for later. When the bench goes empty again, the square of light has shifted, and the day has gone on without any fuss. Your basket is lighter, your hands a little warmer, and the bell, when it sounds, folds the moment neatly and puts it away. Even when the hatch is shut, the almonry goes on working like a heart. You fill a little sack with oats and tie it loosely, so tired fingers can open it without wrestling. By the way, the string has been saved from a parcel and will be saved again. Winter admires such thrift. You make a note to ask the cellarer for a scrap more salt next week, not because need is great, but because a pinch makes a pot remember itself. Right, you write the request on a shard of old wax tablet and set it by the door so feet will step over the thought and remember it. From time to time, travelers bring a little news and leave a little help. A woman folds a neat square of cloth and says it was her mother's and that it would like to be useful here now. You accept it as if it were a handshake. By the way, the cloth knows how to carry bread without bragging. Rain talks on the porch roof, and you shift the bench so the drip will miss the next pair of shoulders. Right. A child counts puddles in the yard and decides to stop at 7 because 7 feels like a friendly number. You open the door a crack to let steam speak with the air, and the breath of barley and onions climbs the step like a guest who has remembered the way. A cup warms a set of hands and leaves the heat behind for the road. There is a hook by the door where a cloak waits for borrowing. You shake it out once a day to remind it of generosity and to discourage moths. The shake is a blessing, really. By the way, you have learned that things lend better if they are looked at kindly. When dusk begins its small work, you light a second candle and stand it near the ledger so numbers will not guess. The ledger's spine has softened at the places where hands agree to hold it. It lies open without asking. Right, you trace a line down the page with a finger warmed on your cup, and the ink rewards you by staying where it is put. Finally, you sweep the stone with a broom that remembers many evenings, and leave a little border of tidiness at the threshold for tomorrow's feet. By the way, the small pile of crumbs becomes a gift for birds that will approve of you without making a fuss. Then the bar goes in its place, and the room rests like a bowl turned upside down, keeping a little warmth for morning. The doorbell learns its evening place with a sound that means enough for today. By the way, the ash bucket waits beside the hearth for those who need to warm hands without staying. There is a talent to taking a little heat and leaving most of it behind. You sweep the steps so that in the morning the first footprints will be clean ones. Right, you tuck 2 loaves under a cloth for early travelers, and the cloth, warmed by bread, pretends to be a small animal, breathing. You rest the broom against the pillar where a hand will find it without needing eyes, and you fold the ledger closed with the care due to a sleeping bird. By the way, quiet is the porter's best uniform. You place 2 small loaves under a clean cloth by habit, and habit nods, satisfied. Right, provision is only a promise kept slightly early. At first light, you lift the hatch a hand's breadth so steam can rehearse its welcome. By the way, you set 2 cups upside down by the ledge so they will be ready to be turned without thinking. The bench gets a quick sweep and the ledger a fresh line. You warm the end of the stylus so the wax won't sulk. Right, a cloth folded once more waits for a wet shoulder that will appreciate such foresight. You place the basket so the first traveler will see it without choosing to stare, and you count the loaves without numbers. Enough, enough, and enough, because winter prefers that word. By the way, a pinch of salt rides in a corner of cloth for those who ask for it with their eyes. The orchard is a resting choir in winter robes. You walk the rows and feel the ground answer under your boots, not soft, not hard, just precise. The trees hold up a grey sky with expert patience. Pruning is a quiet conversation. By the way, a clean cut made at the right angle now will mean a better song of leaves later, and the knife, if kept honest on the stone, will not pull. You pocket a small twig and it smells faintly green even in this cold. Fuel stacks wait under a lean-to, split lengths of beech and ash, a modest cord of peat that has its own agreeable earth smell. Right, you brush the snow off a cart and oil the axle and think about journeys that are only circles, from store to hearth to ash to garden. A robin ticks from a low branch and tilts its head as if supervising. You nod back, which seems appropriate. Then you check the gate latch and feel the certainty of wood and rope and habit working together. Down by the shed, tools wait with their winter manners. You touch the half smooth with use and hang a whetstone by its cord so it can remember to be helpful. The scent in here is a mild braid of tar, timber, and last year's apples stored too long, the kind of smell that admits time has done what time does. Hedges lean into the season. You set a stake and lay a stem, bending without breaking, making a living fence that will leaf and listen come spring. Right, a wattle panel nearby minds the kitchen's little warm nook, keeping the wind respectful while soft herbs try winter in their way. Peat blocks are stacked like large books in a careful wall, their edges drying under a felt of frost. You lift one and are surprised again at how light they are, as if smoke has already made its promise to leave. Ash is not only what is left, it is what begins again, soap from lye, a rinse for cloth, a keeper of paths when the ground goes to glass. In the stable, the breath of a patient animal makes a little weather. You run a hand along a flank and bring back a warmth that is more honest than a fire, and the hay gives a small sweetness when you shake it into the rack. Right, oats chatter in a measure, and the sound of chewing is a good answer to the wind. Cartwheels, like knees, enjoy attention. You check the felloes and the pegs, and you wedge a sliver where a gap has learned to be lazy. Grease is a quiet companion kept where it won't go cold, coaxed with a finger, asked to do its one faithful task. Along the south wall, soil under a plank feels warmer than it has any right to be. You slide it aside and find a brave parsley, a shy sorrel, and a rumor of chives thinking about being green again. Right, you pinch a leaf and the smell is a note of spring played very softly. There is a corner where the compost is taller than you. It smokes faintly in the cold and smells like honest work becoming future work, peelings, stalks, trimmings, yesterday's news that the garden reads and agrees with. A handful feels warm, and you think of how heat travels from a stew to a spoon to a hand, and how patience is always in the recipe. You stack 3 smooth stones by the shed door to persuade it to remember the way it likes to close. The door considers and agrees. By the way, stones enjoy solving wooden problems. In the distance, the mill's tail pole points an opinion at the wind. You nod back, promising oil for gears on a day that is less shy. Right, plans are warmer when they are small. Before midday, you bring in a basket, a few keeping apples still sound, turnips with tails, onions that want dark, and a knot of herbs to hang in the kitchen doorway just to remind everyone of green. Right, the strap bites your shoulder in a friendly, informative way. This is weight, it says, but not trouble. By the time you return to the cloister, the world has shifted half a tone brighter. A thin sun reads the stone. The bell practices an afternoon thought, and in your pocket the pruning knife sits small and sure, as if pleased to have been part of a winter day's conversation. You tuck the pruning knife deeper in your pocket as if to tell it there will be other days like this. By the way, tools nap well when spoken to kindly. A cart passes and leaves behind a sentence of wheel prints that will be read by afternoon sun and then politely erased by frost. Right, the day writes in soft chalk. You walk the rows one more time, touching 3 pruned spurs as if sealing an agreement. The bark feels dry and clean and sure of itself. By the way, a tag of twine marks a tree that asked for a second look in a week. By the lane, the mill's tail pole gets a dab of grease and a promise. You put the promise on the calendar in your head, where winter keeps its good ideas. Right, work is lighter when it travels forward in small pieces. You turn the compost with a fork to let it steam politely in the air, and the smell that rises is the kind of future a garden understands. By the way, 2 pegs in the fence change places and stop arguing with the wind. You press the shed latch and it answers with a small content click. The guest hall keeps a softer light and a wider table. You help set trenchers and place a bowl of herbs where it cannot be forgotten, because green belongs with winter whites and browns. The fish comes in honest and clean, and the bread wears its best crust. Hospitality is not a show here, it is a tone. By the way, meat of 4-footed animals is not for healthy monks, but guests are received with dignity and good order, and fish is a friend to both rules and winter. The ale is clear, and the talk, when it happens, is like a low river, always in its banks. You notice the way steam curls from bowls, and seems to take the edge off words so that nothing turns sharp. Right, someone laughs in a way that makes the candles comfortable, and outside the frost decides to visit the windows with delicate ferns. By the way, guest provisions draw on their own ledger, so generosity never empties the brothers' bowls. The cellarer keeps 2 tallies that agree like old friends. After, you carry a tray back through a corridor that has learned to be narrow and kind at the same time. The kitchen exhales, and you hang up your apron as if it were a small flag that only means enough. A reader stands at a lectern, and the hall listens while spoons find bowls. The voice is even like light, and the words history or homily, it hardly matters, arrive as a background kindness, a way to turn eating into listening with the whole body. The pages turn like a small sail in a room with no wind. Trenchers are thick slices that become plates, and then become part of the meal. They keep the stew truthful, and the table tidy. You ladle a parsley sauce that woke up with verjuice, and you see how the green makes the fish look more itself. Right, a pinch of salt from the little cellar is enough. The hand knows. Silence is not strict here, it is companionable. Murmurs come and go like a tide that mines the shore, and the clink of a cup feels like punctuation that never raises its voice. When the reader pauses, the room breathes in one piece, and then remembers to go on. There is a plate of pears that remembers cloves, and a small warmth of wine, their skins wrinkled into sweetness by patience. You pass them, and watch eyes brighten in a way that means the world is holding together very well indeed. Right, someone says, "Thank you," without sound, as people do with eyebrows and the tilt of a spoon. Bread shows its second kindness when it sops what the trenchers cannot. You fold a piece, and it becomes a small boat, ferrying sauce to a safe harbor. Nothing important is lost, because thrift is a kind of love. The crumb tells you if the bakehouse slept well or turned once in the night. You bank the coals so they will remember their purpose after compline, and you leave a spoon exactly where a hand will thank you for it. By the way, hospitality continues even when a room appears empty. At the sideboard, a jug of small beer thinks patiently about being poured. The clay is cool against your palm, and the little foam wears a cap like a monk's hood. You refill a guest cup, and the thanks is in the blink more than the word. Right, a candle gutters and you trim it, and the room accepts the correction without complaint. After grace, there is a comfortable business of clearing. The scrape of benches is polite. The smell of warm wood rises. The floor accepts a soft broom. The ledger at the door will later note nothing dramatic. 2 strangers, 1 merchant, a brother from the mill, and this will feel like abundance anyway. Back in the kitchen, you set aside a plate for a late arriving traveler, because winter sometimes delays good people. Right, the fishponds go to stock, the bread ends to crumb, and the day goes gently on its way, having been fed without hurry. You rinse the trenches with warm water and set them to dry in a thoughtful row, and the room answers with the smell of wood that remembers forests. By the way, washing is a way of saying grace after the meal. You shake the rushes so they will not keep crumbs awake at night. Right, sleep is also hospitality. You set spoons by 2s on the sideboard for tomorrow so hands will not have to search with hungry minds. By the way, a cloth folded to the breadth of a palm tells the next hour it is expected. The fire gets one more careful nudge, and a lid finds its pot. You leave a note on the slate bread at prime, broth at sext, so the day will keep a gentle tempo. Right, you hang the ladle where it will not cast a shadow over anyone's patience. You set trenchers in a shallow lean so air can make friends with their surfaces. Wood dries better when it feels admired. By the way, a pinch of salt rides in a folded paper for the cook who likes to begin early. Benches slide 2 fingers farther from the wall so cloaks will not quarrel with stone tomorrow. Right, space is a form of politeness, and rooms remember it. You score tomorrow's loaf with a small cross, so knives will find an easy opening. The mark sits quiet as breath. By the way, even bread appreciates a plan. A clean cloth goes over the pitcher so the night will not add dust to generosity. Night stretches the readings like a cat. You take your place in choir, and the first psalm arrives without fanfare, a familiar path walked in a new snow. Your breath and the breath of your brothers make a cotton in the air that keeps the sound warm. The lesson tonight comes with a calm hand, and the words are old friends who know to take off their boots at the door. Winter vigils ask for longer listening, which is not the same as more effort. It is more like setting a bowl under a slow drip and letting it fill. Between lessons you find the warm edge of your sleeve and teach your fingers to live there for a few breaths. By the way, the warming room is only a short corridor away, and the thought of it travels back like a polite messenger, not hurrying you, only reminding. Your knees learn the stone again and again, and each time the stone says, "I remember you." Right, the candle flame breathes when the door thinks about opening, and then everything is still again. When the bell closes the hour, the night is not smaller, but it is friendlier, as if it has introduced itself properly. You walk back to your cell by memory and touch, and the straw mattress sighs with you. Between psalms, a cough is a brief weather event, handled with the courtesy of a folded sleeve. You feel the bench give a little as bodies shift to agree on comfort without a word. A wool cowl turns into a small tent when you lower your head, and the breath you make inside it is better than any fire. Readings travel farther in winter, a paragraph from a father in a century that feels both distant and not, a story of someone's patient love, a note on mercy that comes to sit beside your shoulder like a bird that trusts you. Right, the syllables warm your mouth just by being spoken. The clock of the body keeps the hours even when the tower is quiet. Your stomach remembers the broth, your hands remember the rope, your feet remember the cloisters' polite stones. It is pleasant to be a collection of memories that all agree. On the step outside, the cold is a light hand on the cheek. You look up and the sky is the color of beeswax before it becomes flame, a tender, not quite black, with a suggestion at the rim that morning is writing you a note. Right, frost faintly glitters like an idea you could follow if you wished, but you choose bed instead. In your cell, the straw mattress makes a sound like someone agreeing with you. You pull the blanket and it becomes a small geography, hills and valleys settling, a border of seam, a river of fold. The last sound you notice is a mouse arranging its plans for the night in a place you will check politely tomorrow. And sleep joins the office like another psalm, breathed rather than sung. The hours continue without you, which is a relief. Your part is to rest now, so that bells have someone to answer them in the morning. A draft wanders under the door and remembers to be polite. You teach it the trick of the rolled cloth, and it thanks you by learning to wait outside. By the way, wind can be educated if you speak slowly to it. You lay your sandals so that the left will find the left foot without debate, and you fold your cowl so the seam minds the neck. Right, tomorrow begins the night before, and beginnings prefer kindness. On the sill, a shy star peers through the oiled parchment. It seems to practice breathing with you. By the way, when breathing and stars keep time, morning has already started a little. You settle the blanket along the edge so it will not argue with your shoulder, and the straw answers with a soft affirmative. Right, the room receives you as a guest it has known for years. Sometimes the antiphon gives you a thread to hold through the dark corridors. You hum it under your breath, and it rides the chill like a tame spark all the way to the latch of your cell. By the way, a tune is a kind of handrail when light is thinking about whether to come or go. On very cold nights, the warming room receives a few slow-footed friends after the office. A jug sits with a scrap of spice and a slice of lemon that came on a very old favor and has been dried against such moments. Water whispers itself toward hot and does not insist. Right, you hold the cup in both hands and learn its roundness before the first sip. You set your sandals where morning will find them without negotiation, and tuck your cowl so it will not learn a fold that argues with the neck. By the way, such small preparations are another kind of prayer. They keep tomorrow from stumbling over today. Last of all, you listen, only listening, nothing more to the building breathe. A settling beam, a hidden rill in the conduit, the feather rustle of a page somewhere closing itself. Right, you answer all of it with the consent of sleep. You settle the blanket along the edge so it will not argue with your shoulder, and the straw answers with a soft affirmative. Right, the room receives you as a guest it has known for years. The candle's last breath is a tiny bow. You accept it and give one back. By the way, ceremonies between friends should be this small. One morning the drip is a little more talkative. You step into the cloister and hear water finding its way down from a gutter to a barrel, a cheerful arithmetic. The frost writes less and the grass practices a quieter crunch. In the cellar, the chalk marks add up to enough, which is a gentle word, and in the granary, a mouse prints a small poem you quickly erase with a broom that makes no accusation. Inventories in winter are really letters to your future self, and this one says, "We did fine." Someone mentions the first shoots near the south wall, shy as a thought you are not ready to share. Right, you take out the pruning knife again, just to feel how it sits in your palm, and then you put it away. At table, the bread tastes like a story coming to an end in the good way, with the promise that there will be another. The broth seems brighter without changing anything at all. You carry a small bucket to catch a steady drip where the eaves have remembered how to let go. The sound is not impatient, it is a metronome for a different tune, a new measure sliding in under the old one. Paths along the garth turn from crisp to soft. You walk heel then toe to mind the mud, and the print you leave is a neat oval with a memory of the soul's pattern, a little stamp that says present. Right. The cold in your hands now has an agreement with the air. It will not bite, only remind. In the bakehouse, a window thinks about opening for the first time in weeks. You lift the latch, and a different temperature arrives. bringing a question mark that smells like water. The leaven wakes faster. You feed it, and it nods. The cellarer allows himself a longer look at the last salt barrel. The staves are still tight, the brine still clean, and the tally agrees with the wall mark from 3 weeks ago. Right. A wedge of cheese gets its turn and shows a patient paste, a little more give when pressed. It is a spring thought rehearsing. Against the south wall the heat gathers. You move aboard and there is a rumour of cress, bolder than it ought to be. You pinch a leaf and it is pepper and green and something like laughter. A pot of ale near the hearth decides to bubble in a friendly, lazy way, as if the season has interest in the idea of lifting. Laundry on the line under the cloister dries in a pattern. Cuffs first, then hems, then the high shoulders, as if the garments remember the shape of bodies they will warm. Right, you smooth a sleeve with a palm and it falls into obedience the way snow falls into water. A traveller speaks of a road with fewer drifts, and a ditch with running water, and the porter nods as if this were a blessing because it is. The almonry pot learns a new sound when barley meets a handful of nettle tips. It is not spring soup yet, but it is practicing. Evening finds you at the rill where ice has pulled back from a stone, leaving a wet lip that glows like pewter. You watch a thread of water choose the easiest path and make it easier by having chosen it. Right, you decide to do the same tomorrow with some small chore, and when the bell speaks, it sounds a little rounder in the softer air. You walk toward the warmth thinking of seed trays, not yet, but soon, of new soles for old shoes, of how the kitchen window will welcome a wider crack. The last of the dried apples will taste like a story told to a friend you have known since childhood. By the pond edge, the first midges make a very small idea of a cloud, and then decide against it. They will try again another day. Right, restraint is also a kind of spring. You carry the bucket inside and pour the gathered drip into the pot that learns all seasons. It accepts the lesson with a single, approving bubble. By the way, kitchens keep calendars in flavors. Along the walk, you pause to press a heel of bread into a friendly hand that did not ask. The gesture is brief and sufficient. Right, warmth often travels better in small pieces. You add one more mark to the tally of drips and smile at how a bucket can become a calendar when it tries. By the way, counting is only gratitude wearing numbers. You test the ground with a heel where snow has chosen to be thin. It approves and you approve back. Right, agreements like these are what Thor is made of. In the garth, the herb bed wears a delicate map where meltwater has traced its opinions. Each line is a sentence that says, soon. By the way, a shy parsley keeps its head down and still manages to wave. You keep a small tally of drips in your pocket barrel. Eve, rill stone, and it becomes a friendly nonsense poem you can recite to yourself while walking. Right, numbers are kinder when they wear little hats like that. Near the warm wall, cress makes a dotted line, and you follow it with a finger as if reading a child's story. By the way, you decide to bring a pinch to the infirmary later, the way a window might bring light to a dim room. When you pass the fish pond, the skin of ice has learned a new word edge and says it softly. Right, you say it back and keep walking. Candles gather like small suns in human hands, and the procession moves at the speed of a heartbeat at rest. You watch the flames approve the faces, and the faces approve the flames, and the church becomes a quiet constellation. Blessing is a kind of naming, and today light is named friend for another year. Some candles will travel to kitchens and workshops, and some will stand in choir, but all of them remember this morning. Back at the hearth you set a pot to warm, not to prove anything, not to celebrate loudly, only to say yes to the day. Right, the bread under your hand is exact, the knife is obedient, and steam rises in a familiar question that does not need an answer. You breathe, and each exhale loosens like a sheet of thin paper floating to the table. Now your eyes can grow a little heavier, and the winter, having been fed and listened to, grows gentle and steps aside for spring. Earlier in choir, the candle blessing moved like water in a shallow bowl, no rush, only a traveling brightness. Wicks were trimmed, tapers touched, and agreed to share fire. Hands learned again how to hold a small sun without gripping. Bees, who do their work in months you are not thinking of now, made this morning possible without attending it. In the refectory, today's soup has a little more comfort than yesterday's, not by rule but by custom. Candlemas likes a kindness in a bowl. A round of cheese is cut, and the rind makes a satisfying thock that sounds like a door gently closing on the hardest weeks. Right, you notice how a table can glow without changing its wood. Light does this, and steam and neighborly hands. Some candles go to the workshops, and a bundle to the almonry for evenings when a traveler arrives after sun has gone and needs the sight of a human face. One is tucked into the infirmary chest, a promise against a difficult night, not a cure, only a company. In the cellars, a few stubs stand ready near the cask bungs, because tapping in poor light is a conversation you should not rush. Right, a chalk line on a stave looks friendlier when a flame agrees with it. You set aside bread for the poor with a ribbon of cloth, not for show but so hands in the morning know what to take without asking. A plate of pears left over from the guest table finds a new purpose in a small tart for the infirmary. Nothing is grand, everything careful. Outside, the path holds a thin damp that does not argue with boots. The birds consider a new arrangement. You carry a candle to your desk and set it carefully, and the flame, when it agrees to stand, seems to say quietly, "Continue." Evening comes, and the blessed candles make a soft architecture in the dark, a framework to hang the hours on. You read a little more slowly, and you eat a little more thoughtfully, and when you lay the knife down, its shadow looks almost like a river. Right, the bell agrees with this gentleness, and the night lets it speak. Before bed, you look into the pantry and count without counting bread, a jar of pickled roots, the friendly curve of a cheese, and you feel no urgency, only gratitude that has learned to be quiet. You snuff the candle with a steady hand and watch the wisp rise. It looks, for a moment, like winter leaving the room. On the sill, 2 stubs rest in a shallow dish, as if they too were sleepy travelers who have found their beds. By the way, small lights often do the best work. They never frighten the dark, they teach it manners. You warm a scrap of wax between finger and thumb and mend a frayed place in the wick. The thread accepts the lesson and promises to stand straighter tomorrow. Right, improvement is often the size of a fingertip. Down the corridor, a faint ribbon of beeswax follows your steps, and you remember summer fields whose names you never learned, and hives that worked without being asked. By the way, gratitude travels well on sense. It needs no translations. Outside, the well wears a neat circle where snow has been taught to make way. A star looks down through steam and nods as if to say it understands candles perfectly. Right, the sky is a guest at Candlemas too, it just prefers to admire from the threshold. And when you finally breathe the last small breath of the evening and cup the flame, the dark returns like a friend who has learned to whisper. The room keeps a memory of warm air, the wick keeps a lesson, and you keep a light you will carry behind your eyes into morning. You wipe the trimmers on a square of linen, and the faint scent of beeswax answers like a memory of fields. By the way, tools of light like to be kept in order as much as tools of wood. A small bundle of new tapers goes back to the cupboard with a ribbon that remembers many mornings. You smooth the ribbon as if it could learn patience from your palm. Right, abundance is quieter than people think. You leave 1 stub by the almonry ledger and 1 by the porter's hatch. Practical blessings that will make faces visible when the door opens late. By the way, light that travels in small pieces seems to find people more easily. Before sleep, you sit a moment longer than necessary and let the room say its soft good nights. Wood to stone, cloth to air, wick to snuffer. Right, the hour closes like a book that knows it will be opened again soon,